What's up, guys? Tim Little. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today's video, we're talking about some tips and tricks for summertime fishing, chatterbaits, and swim jigs. First off, happy 4th of July, happy Independence Day. Hope you guys are being safe out on the water, catching a ton of bass, followed by a great fireworks show this evening. But thanks for turning in on a holiday. Hopefully you guys had a long weekend, hopefully a 3-day weekend, and you got a lot of fish catching in. But today's video, we're talking summer fishing, chatterbaits, and swim jigs. You know, the other day my boys were down fishing and asking what to throw, either a chatterbait or an underspin. And when I said a chatterbait, one of them said, well, what kind? And even though I know what he meant by, what color, it got me thinking there's so many different types of bladed jigs, chatterbaits on the market. You know, you have the Jackhammer, you have the Stealth Blade, the Mini Max, just a lot of different types, a lot of different sizes, and they all come into play, especially right now. So today's video, gonna cover some tips and some tricks for summertime fishing chatterbaits, swim jigs, my favorite trailers, gear, colors, all of that good stuff. So let's start off with the basic chatterbait. You guys know that I love throwing the Jackhammer. You know, it is kind of the pinnacle of the bladed jig market. You know, it's been around for several years, and for me, I have a ton of confidence in the Jackhammer. Doesn't matter if you're throwing a bluegill pattern or a shad pattern or a fire craw, crawdad, crayfish pattern. I have a ton of confidence, but that is not the end-all say-all when it comes to summertime fishing. So in my mind, I'm thinking grass, bladed jig, chatterbait around grass. And that's really where these different chatterbaits, different styles of chatterbaits really come into play. So let's get started. So Jackhammer, you guys know that is our favorite. That is paired up with a Yamamoto Seiko. Just like every video, I'll link all these products and gear and line and reels, all that stuff down below in the video description. I'm going to cover a little bit fairly quickly today, so we'll leave links down below. But the Jackhammer, you know, most people think just throw it out there and reel it back. That works, but right now with the grass coming up, you know, water temps coming up, the water temp out here is 87 degrees. So you have that grass coming up. So if you just start chucking and winding, you're gonna end up in and around grass. So I want you guys to pay attention to that, because this time of the year, that is when I like to switch to this is actually a glass composite rod and straight fluorocarbon. Those of you guys that follow the channel know that I love throwing a braid to leader typically on my chatterbait on most things, but because we have grass out here, I make the switch. And the reason being, the bass are going to be in the grass. They're going to be congregated in those isolated grass patches, or hunting along the grass edges, the weed lines out in front of that. They're going to be buried in the stuff coming out of it to ambush out. When I get hung up in the grass and I want to pop this thing loose, having this glass composite rod, it's a slower taper. Let me grab some line and show you guys. It bends a lot deeper down into the butt of the rod. You guys see that? So what that allows this chatterbait to do, you guys know that a lot of guys throwing crankbaits will like to throw these types of rods, but having that slower tip, that more moderate action, when I go to rip this thing out of the grass, you know, there's kind of two ways to fish this right now. One is over the tops of the grass, ticking it, and the other is actually ripping it through the grass, getting it hung up and then popping it, letting it fall. Reel, get hung up, popping it. Now, where this rod, reel, and line combo come into play is when this bladed jig is exiting the grass. When I'm ripping it out of the grass, this rod is loading up slower. If I had a real fast action, real fast tip, heavy action rod, it's gonna rip that right out of the grass, you know, light speed out, right? Having this little bit of a give and paired with that fluorocarbon, what I think is allowing this bait to do is kind of slingshotting and getting quicker as it comes out of the grass. So it's out faster, 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 and then swimming off, almost like a fleeing bait fish or crawdad, crayfish. That is typically when I get my bites fishing a bladed jig in the grass. It's when it's exiting that grass and it's that initial startup as that bait is changing speed because that rod is kind of slingshotting that bait forward. It's almost like that fish, that bait, mimicking a bait fish, is picking up speed to get away from the bass. Now, if I had, like I said, that heavy action, real fast tip, and I just rip that thing out of the grass, boom, that bait's gone, and the bass is like, where to go, you know? So I like to, if I'm fishing through grass, I like to switch to this combo right here. And I'll link some favorites down below in the video description, but again, 2 ways to fish it. Just reel, just tick, tick, tick. You're ticking the tops of the grass. You get hung up, you're gonna pop it, let it go. It's really all about getting it hung up and exiting that grass. They've actually pulled quite a bit of water. Looks like the lake's down about 18 inches today. So not too much depth out here. Maybe 3.5, 4 foot, but not too much. But as you can see, I'm fishing from shore. So this applies to pond fishermen, bank fishermen, shallow water fishermen, grass fishermen. I got some tips for the guys that are gonna be fishing offshore a little bit later in this video. But again, it's all about getting hung up in that grass and exiting out with this setup. Now, getting back to that initial question, what kind? That is the staple. That is what I typically am going with. The 2 alternatives, 3 alternatives actually. This guy, the little Mini Max. A real tight vibration with that little blade, so much smaller than the Jackhammer. It's just a real tight, subtle vibration. You can see I paired that up. That's actually this guy right here. That's the Swim On by Big Bite. It's just a cool little compact package, but it still has a very stout hook. So when you're fishing fisheries like Chickamauga or Clear Lake, the Delta, you know, Lake Fork, you know, big bass factories, big lakes that produce big fish, you don't want to downsize your hook, because even though they're feeding on the smaller profile bait, you don't want to give up the strength of your hook. But I really like this as an alternative, especially when these fish are keyed on little bait fish, little shad, not big gizzard shad, not big crawdads, not big bluegill, just little shad, 2.5, 3-inch shad. That is really where the Mini Max, I get more bites fishing the Mini Max than the traditional Jackhammer in those situations. Again, just gonna be ticking the grass. Typically with the smaller presentation, the lighter head, I'm just ticking the tops of the grass. Or if I can visibly see the isolated grass patches, I'm just fishing along the grass patches. These baits, the blade I mean, it's the first handle turn that blade gets kicking. That's really important with a bladed jig or a chatterbait. You don't want to have to go 3 or 4 handle turns or a rod pop to get that blade vibrating. You want that in that strike zone, making the proper vibration and sound immediately. It's already vibrating. So, for instance, yesterday, it's in a situation where the bass were blowing up on little tiny bait fish. No gizzards around, no big thread fin. It was all little tiny thread fin. And I picked up the smaller Mini Max. Again, it's just that smaller profile, a little bit different sound, a little bit different vibration, but it matters when the fish are keyed in on that really small bait fish, and you're fishing around other guys that are throwing the traditional, you know, thunder crickets and jackhammers and just all your other bladed jigs, try switching it up to the little mini max. Now, last but not least, actually I have one more for you, and then I'm going to talk about deep water fishing real quick. This is my finesse chatterbait. Now again, summertime, it's like I said, it's all about the grass, right? You're finding that real healthy grass. You're finding the grass lines. You're finding where those bait fish are keying, you know, hiding in. A lot of them will kind of congregate around pieces of structure, pieces of cover, and in the grass patches. So the little stealth blade, I have a little 3-inch Largo shad on there. Look at this little bait fish profile. Again, you can go super natural, you can go with that clear blade, just like the Mini Max. It engages on that first handle turn. But what is key about this, you guys noticed I lost the skirt. It is strictly a swim bait. Strictly a swim bait. See, no skirt on there at all. Now you guys know the benefit of throwing a chatterbait or a swim jig is the secondary action, the pulsating, the movement, the free-flowing movement of the skirt as that tail's kicking, as that head is shaking. What I like this for, when you guys are on an underspin bite, a weedless underspin bite, and you just want to throw something different, still targeting those same fish that are feeding on that swim bait with a little bit of flash, try this right here. Z-Man has, I think they're called the naked heads. They come in a 2-pack. It's literally just the head and hook, and you can put your favorite swim bait, your favorite fluke, soft plastic jerkbait on the back. Even that spunk shad really works well, but it is more of just a finessey presentation. You don't have that big skirt. When you start throwing, even the Mini Max has that just bigger profile with that skirt flaring in the water. You get rid of that, and then you just get more and more finessey, but you're still adding vibration, you're still adding sound to that tip, you know, that basic swim bait. Again, that's that Largo shad. I believe that's Tennessee shad color. This works really well when you're on those fish that are you've been catching on the underspin and you just want to change it up. So if you haven't already, add that to your arsenal. Just a little chatterbait, a little swim bait, jerk bait, soft plastic jerk bait on your chatterbait head. Again, they sell them individually. They sell them in packs without the skirts on them. They even sell them in willow blades. It just changes, just giving those fish something they haven't necessarily seen. And this thing swims so good. I wish I can get you guys some underwater footage of it, but it's so murky and beat up. But it is, you fish it just like a swim bait. You don't necessarily have to pop it or rip it, you know, through the grass unless you're in that situation. But it's just adding that vibration. It's got that clear blade on there. That is a winner, guys. So if you haven't already, definitely try out 1 or 2 of those smaller, different types of versions of those chatterbaits. Now, last but not least on the chatterbaits, before we talk about swim jigs, let's talk about deep fishing. Everything I've talked about up until now is about grass, shallow, lighter heads, smaller profiles. Now we're talking about the big dog. This is an 1.25 ounce jackhammer. That's paired up with a 4-inch Largo shad. You ledge fishermen, you guys that are fishing deep offshore breaks, humps, creek channels, what else? Ledges, I talked about ledges, or just bottom dragging, where you'd throw your 10XD or your 6XD. Try throwing a heavy chatterbait. Now I don't have that guy tied on, but the trick about that is all about how you fish it. I mean, you can go out there and chuck and wind. You'll catch fish on it. Deeper water, you're gonna present a bait deeper than with that action than they haven't seen before. So do your basic retrieve. Where I have the most success is hopping almost like you would, I mean, you could fish it like a hair jig. Let off, let it fall. Let it fall. But I really like the hopping technique, almost like a flutter spoon. You know, I'm not hitting it as hard. And let me get a little farther cast out there for you guys. Woo. You know, I'm not really pulling like a flutter spoon and letting it fall. You can if you want, but typically it's just a hop, let it fall, hop, let it fall. Like you're fishing the LV500, a lipless crankbait. A lot of guys don't fish a bladed jig or a chatterbait this way. This works great right now and it works great in the wintertime. But upsizing your bait, especially if you're fishing deeper water, around current, you're gonna need that heavy 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce, 1.25 ounce chatterbait. I was just doing that right there with, this is a 3/8 ounce, but you guys get the picture, right? Get it out there on that break, that deep water, 20 to 30 foot, get that thing hopping and falling, and you guys will be surprised with the amount of fish you catch on a, I mean, it's not that big of a profile. It's the same size as a normal bladed jig or chatterbait, but it's just got that bigger head on it. Like I said, 1.25 ounce, 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce. Totally depends on your fishery, but don't be afraid to try that heavy jackhammer. Now, let's switch gears and talk about swim jigs. A little bit more, I'll kind of go through these a little bit quicker. I really fish just 2 types of swim jigs. Right off the bat, that Dirty Jigs, the California swim jig. You know what sets this swim jig apart? It was the first jig to come out with that no jack hook. You know, that is a hook that you're not gonna bend out, but this was the original, that no jack, just real stout hook. You can throw straight braid. The benefit of throwing the swim jig, again, shore fishermen, shallow water fishermen, pond fishermen, you're fishing around grass. So you guys see the grass line out here. What's cool about this, now I actually have braid to a mono leader. I'm just swimming this. I'm letting that tail do the action, comes up and over the grass, drops down, swims, drops through. You can fish this thing right through fairly thick grass, fairly thick reeds, bulrushes, brush piles, that sort of stuff. You can fish this in and around right through with that heavy hook. You're not gonna bend it out if you get stuck. With the way that weed guard is set up, it deflects really the majority of the snags that you'd get hung up in. You see that weed guard right there? Again, there's that no jack. But I can throw this right through this grass. Now, when I get to a hole, I'm gonna let it drop in, pop it out, let it drop in. It is the 4-wheel drive swim jig. Now the difference, it's silent. I want it to be able to, as I come through that grass, I want it to drop through. I don't want it to get hung up on a lot of things. I want it to fall through. But again, it's a silent version. Again, 4-wheel drive, no jack hook, big weed guard. It's power on power. You can run straight braid. Right now I'm running braid to a 20-pound mono leader, but totally depends on you. But the swim jig is awesome. Now, you guys that don't have gear to throw a 1/2 ounce, 3/4 swim jig, you can throw the smaller swim jig. I'll link this down below in the video description. It's another one by Dirty Jigs. Just a little smaller hook. Still, you're not going to bend that out. A lot smaller of a head. I think a lot of guys will throw too heavy of swim jigs. I guess that's a point I really want to touch real quick. If you're throwing through bulrushes or reeds, cattails, that sort of stuff, you want that heavy jig. You want that thing just to plow its way through. If you're just fishing isolated grass patches, you're fishing around grass edges, throwing a little bit lighter swim jig can get you a lot of bites that you wouldn't necessarily get if you're throwing a big heavy jig. Again, it's real subtle, real finessey until you set the hook. That hook's gonna jack them, but it's more of a finessey approach. But you're gonna fish this the same area that you would fish the Mini Max or, you know, the Stealth Blade. It's just a real subtle presentation with a lot of backbone. That hook is real stout. But again, you're not putting a lot of vibration, a lot of sound in the water. Now, one little tip for you guys that are fishing around a lot of grass, I'll link these down below in the video description, but they're little, almost like a bobber stop. They're just a little bit bigger. And they can go on the face of your swim bait, the face of your swim jig. Again, butt that right up against that line tie. And what that allows, it allows this bait to come through the grass, kind of pushes the grass away from your knot and away from the head of that bait and makes it more weedless. This is a really fun way to catch them. Again, if you've been throwing the underspin, you've been throwing just the basic Kitech or basic swim bait, try throwing the swim jig, because you get that added, that secondary movement of that skirt pulsating, you know, kind of like the opposite of taking the skirt off of that chatterbait. Try changing it up with the swim jig, because you do get that secondary action. You get the scales flaring or the movement of the sides of the fish, not just the little tail kicking. We call that secondary action, action that the fish, a real fish, is putting off. You know, gills moving, scales moving, fins kind of just pulsating, not just a little tail, a little boot tail in the back kicking. That guy right there is a must. If you're around the grass, you're a shallow water fisherman, you need to be throwing one or the other. And I always have both tied on, because one day they'll eat one better than they will eat the other. Now, as far as colors, I keep it really simple. I go with some kind of bluegill or brim pattern, some kind of threadfin shad or gizzard shad pattern, some kind of white with some flash in it. And then if I'm fishing around crawdads, then I will go with some kind of version of fire craw or some kind of craw pattern. That is it. Very simple. As far as trailers, I'll link all those down below in the video description. I have, depending on the size of the chatterbait, I really like that spunk shad. That works great. The Zako, the Yamamoto Zako, the Largo shad, and then one key trailer that I almost forgot to talk about. If you're throwing the heavy swim jig, the River to Sea, the D-Walker, it's just a stiffer swim bait, more resilient, and that thing works really good if you're fishing around brush through the grass. It's gonna hold up better than a Kitech, or this one's actually a swim bait from Big Bite Baits. Again, I'll link everything down below in the video description, but put your favorite swim bait trailer on there. Go with either a bluegill pattern, a shad pattern, or a craw pattern, and you guys will have success this summer fishing in the grass with swim jigs and chatterbaits. Guys, if you have any questions, please leave those down below in the comment section. I will try to get to those as soon as possible. Again, thank you for the support. We're almost just a couple thousand away from 500,000 subscribers. So if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. That's just a goal that we set earlier this year, and it'd be really cool to reach it. But as always, guys, you guys are awesome. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. If you learned something, hit that like button. Remember to subscribe. And most importantly, enjoy your Independence Day. Be safe and catch some fish.